In the egg industry, Vivian White reports on the implications for modern food production in Factory Fresh, the Food Revolution.
Benedictas, benedicat, paeresum Christum Dominum nostrum. Amen.
Blessed be the farmers and the Minister of Agriculture too. Traditionally at the start of each new year, the pick of the crop of the industry, farmers, feedstuff manufacturers, meat pie makers and moneymen sit down together to eat the best that modern agriculture can offer, a homegrown dinner before the Oxford Farming Conference. On the menu this year, salmon with fresh egg mayonnaise, followed by roast beef and 2 days more beef about farming after that. 40 years ago, when this conference first met, Britain was short of food and had been threatened with starvation. Now the tables are turned. We are groaning with surpluses. But grand, distinguished farmers like Lord Carrington knew the salmonella scare in eggs had overshadowed their success. Farmers may have brought us plenty, but they weren't expecting many thanks.
I remember the day, and perhaps even some of you remember the day, when we ate nothing but powdered eggs. And my God, how disgusting they were. And a fresh egg was a treat, not a thing to be put in the incinerator. Mr. Chairman, agriculture has been through difficult times before, and we shall survive, because we always do survive. And I give you the toast of agriculture.
In 2 days' time, John McGregor, the Minister of Agriculture, gives evidence to a House of Commons committee. Because of salmonella, every aspect of modern scientific farming is under question, and the ministry which helped promote mass food production under siege. Tonight, Panorama looks at large-scale farming and its risks. What began as a scare over eggs has gone much further. Now concerned consumers are at odds with the farmers who gave us a world of plenty.
The consumers of this country are becoming obsessive and neurotic. We've all known from birth that you've got to eat to live. Now we're told, and the consumers are told by the media and by politicians, that if you eat at all, you're liable to catch some appalling disease. And most of this, for some inexplicable reason, is blamed on farmers. That's unfair, it's wrong, and it lacks all form of common sense as well.
The revolution in food has given us cheaper food, but it's given us huge public health costs at the same time. And we're saying that's really got to be stopped. We've got to try and go back to the drawing board and plan for a food production system for the year 2000 that actually minimises the health risks, but gives us the benefits of a system of production that feeds all.
This is the year 2000 now, the appliance of science to agriculture in its most intense form. If you eat eggs, they probably come from here. 6 out of 10 of all the egg-laying hens in the country begin life here, genetically bred to be good egg layers, small light birds that don't eat a lot. So the males aren't needed. Conveniently colour-coded, they're born yellow, identified, rejected, and sent off to be gassed. The remaining 49%, the females, continue life's rich journey down the food production line, and another 1%, substandard, are disposed of. The rest stay on their voyage to the frontiers of modern farming. Next stop, the clinic, for a vaccination against a disease called Marex that used to be a killer once. Everything in this mass production world is monitored, as in any other high-tech factory. Fluff and feces and culled chicks regularly checked to make sure they're salmonella-free. Off down the conveyor belt, they tumble. This is the food revolution, as if Henry Ford had turned his mind to chickens instead of cars.
This little chick's one of the 48% or so lucky ones. She's been alive about 12 hours.
After this, she'll be off, down to be reared, and then to start her life producing eggs. She's part of the new world of scientific farming. She's never known any other life, and she never will.
And 5 months later, they're hard at work. These birds from that hatchery are at Fair Ash Farm in Avon. Mass-produced as chicks and now in mass production. 4 birds per cage, 12,000 to a shed, 300 eggs per hen in a 14-month productive life. This farmer keeps 5,500 birds free range too, besides his normal complement of 60,000 in their cages. But mass production methods have brought mass production losses too. Mr. Wood's birds didn't get salmonella, but demand for eggs was hit, and 12,000 birds, a whole shedful, went for slaughter 2 months early.
We've just ended up as pawns in a chess game, and we've just got kicked about. And we've not got a problem, as they suggest. There's always been an odd egg that is been wrong. That's always been. But to blow up into such a huge scare, something that doesn't exist, is quite incredible. They're going through now the whole of the food industry and the chain. And I think the egg production side was the one that started it all off. They picked on us for some reason.
But eggs was where the Salmonella enteritidis outbreak happened. Eggs apparently touched a raw public nerve about food production, a disquiet not dispelled by official confusion about whether the outbreak was an epidemic at all. All farming is becoming large-scale science-led, but that's changed the nature of the risks. Overall, these processes may be far safer. Fair Ash Farm eggs are fine to eat, but accidents, if they happen, may no longer be little rural ones. To grow more food, we've sprayed the land with chemicals and money, altered nature, stopped diseases, prolonged life, and transformed what we get from the good earth. We've compounded new techniques in quite new combinations, and because we're not almighty, we have to live with all the consequences. But we have got cheap food. The transformation in every production system, not just eggs, has brought us what we said we wanted: quantity and variety at low prices. Powerful producers have taken each thing that we eat and changed the way it's born, grown, fed, killed, processed and manufactured. But though we've bought the result, the salesmen know we haven't quite bought the changes in the way it's done. Dewhursts haven't any doubts about the improvements they've brought us. They're the country's biggest chain of butchers selling fresh meat and meat-based products. Scientifically farmed and manufactured, carefully preserved and packaged.
Well, everyone likes the idea that all the food that they eat is the same sort of food that they see around the altar at a harvest festival. That's why all the popular advertising slogans and names give the impression of farm. It's country fresh, it's farm fresh, all that sort of thing. It's to give the impression that it is lovely, untouched, fresh food. But of course you can't feed the millions of people now who can afford to buy a wide range of foods if you're going to produce it as the farmer's wife used to 50 years ago.
You have this appalling double standard. You expect me as a farmer to wear a smock, to chew a straw, to wander around a muddy farmyard kicking free-range chickens to kingdom come because you think it's picturesque. On the other hand, you expect your industries, and I regard myself as an industry, to be computerized and technological. And when I am computerized and when I am technological, I get it in the neck from the British public. That is a ludicrous double standard. Meanwhile, have you done all those bills?
Computer-driven, capital-intensive, Oliver Woolston's in the farming business, big business. 3,500 acres in Cambridgeshire, that's big. This tractor alone costs £50,000. On this farm, they grow wheat which other farmers buy as seed to grow the wheat we eat as bread. He uses 300 tons or so of phosphate fertilizer every year, and other aids and additives to match. This is a modern high-tech farm. There's a medicine cupboard next door with chemicals to deal with more plant diseases than Farmer Woolston, not so long ago, even knew existed.
Farming after the war, particularly this sort of farming, arable farming, experienced the biggest revolution we've known, probably since the Garden of Eden itself. I know that sounds crazy, but between 1970 and 1980, yields of wheat and barley doubled. And to double in 10 years is, I put it to you, unparalleled in the history of agriculture. I'm not the sort of person who believes, like, say, Christian scientists do, that somehow scientific progress is obscene and wrong and immoral. That's why when I have a headache, I'm only too happy to take an aspirin. That's why when I have a pain in my stomach, I'm perfectly willing to go along and let a specialist look at it. That's why when I grow cereals, I'm perfectly happy to keep mildew off my wheat.
New systems may produce new problems. New high-protein chicken feed has been developed that contains chicken, an innovation which in principle, if a disease occurs, increases the chances that it may be spread unless sterilisation is secure. In 1987, the ministry found that in a sample of feed processing plants, a quarter were infected. They say safety's been tightened up. This farm no longer uses chicken in the feed, but it is still allowed. In modern high-intensive farming, hardly anything about a chicken goes to waste. The feathers first are used for glue. A chicken's drumsticks, wings and breast we eat. The bones, crushed and rinsed in polyphosphate, can go into chicken products, like cooked pies, for us to eat as well. The feet, and just the feet, are thrown away. The head, the offal and intestines are used for protein feed, which, within the terms of the ministry's own rules, are fed to chickens once again.
One of the main areas of fault is the processing of food, animal food, using parts of the same animals. Nature doesn't allow, and it's not a natural instinct for one animal to eat its own species. In fact, it's totally foreign to it. And that seems to be nature's understanding of the bacteriological and biological dangers. Because if one animal starts to eat its own stock, then the dangers of infection increasing are very great indeed.
The material goes through a very extensive process in the feed mills to ensure that it is safe. Indeed, they are obliged by legislation to produce feed compounds that are safe. Now, what we have got to be sure is that in that process, there is no salmonella present, and we are tightening up even further to try to make sure that that's absolutely certain. But there is another problem, and the other problem is that salmonella is in the environment, and you cannot be certain that that feed subsequent to leaving the mill will not get salmonella through the environment.
May the recycling process itself not be inherently unnatural and therefore dangerous?
I don't know what you mean by unnatural.
A former Minister of Health has told us that animals eating their own isn't the way nature does it, and if we do it a different way, that is to invite a problem.
I rely absolutely on the scientific advice that I get on this all the way through, and whenever I think there is a risk, we shall act.
All farming alters nature, but new unnatural practices appear to have brought new risks. This, rendering down sheep offal for use in cattle feed, was banned last year. It may have been the way that cattle got a disease new to science, bovine spongiform encephalopathy, BSE. It affects the cow's brain, and scientists aren't sure yet, but suspect it came from sheep, an animal in which a similar disease called scrapie is endemic, because sheep offal, including brain tissue, was in the cattle feed. It's very unlikely that a version of BSE has been passed along the food chain into humans, but not absolutely certain yet. On this Oxfordshire farm, there's nothing wrong with the animals' feed, and there's been nothing wrong with the animals either. But diseases like BSE that may frighten consumers are a matter of concern for farmers first. Paul Christensen farms dairy and beef cattle as well as winter wheat. He's a conservation-minded farmer. The Countryside Commission have made his farm a demonstration project to show what can be done to protect the natural environment. Farmer Christensen found out, after BSE, that what he and other farmers had been feeding healthy calves could have been dangerous. He didn't know what was in the feed at all before. You give your cattle, your young cattle pellets, don't you, as feed?
Yes.
Do you know what's in that?
Well, we do now because there's a general awareness of problems that might be associated with it. But it's true to say that in the past we haven't always known what's been in the calf food, no.
So you just bought what you had to buy and you took it on trust?
Yes.
And did that apply to quite a lot of the techniques of farming, that it wasn't a process in which you're in control?
I wouldn't say that we were out of control. I think that's going too far, but certainly a lot of the, I think really the essence is that a lot of the things that we were doing, we were not aware of the implications of them. So although we felt we were in control, perhaps we weren't in control as much as we thought we were.
Some farmers are unsettled by the pace of scientific change in farming methods. But the scientists who engineered this new world and who monitor its dangers have always understood the risks in what they were helping to create.
As agriculture changes, as systems changes, new diseases again will emerge.
Why?
Because patterns of husbandry change, patterns of nutrition change, disease organisms themselves change. This is a continuing evolution.
So as the new farming systems come along, you take it for granted that there are bound to be new diseases in their wake?
Absolutely. It's happened in the past, it's happening now. It will continue to happen.
So the best you can do is to keep one step ahead?
Yes. Well, at best. Very often, of course, we're not one step ahead, we're one step behind. So often the disease organisms have the whip hand, but we like to make sure that they have the whip hand for a very short period.
So this is the Garden of Eden. Around the dais at the Oxford conference, the farmers paid tribute to themselves with a show of work. As they've grown more food, the farmers and especially the food industry have formed a close rapport with the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Food. But now that surpluses have replaced shortages and food safety is a growing concern, the close relationship between the industry and the ministry is being questioned on public interest grounds. Should the Ministry of Agriculture be in charge of food?
The Ministry of Agriculture puts production interests first. Time and again, in our experience, it will say, well, we'll give the benefit of doubt to production interests on additives, on pesticide residues in food, on nitrate residues in food. Time and again, the ministry acts as a fifth estate for production interests. The Ministry of Agriculture, in its own study of protein processing plants, found that 1/4 of them were contaminated with salmonella and did nothing about it. When I spoke to a senior civil servant about that, she said, well, we like to have gentlemen's chats about these sort of things. For the rest of the population, the law should have applied.
The Ministry of Agriculture is quite deliberately close to the industry. On its Food Advisory Committee, there are 7 from the industry: Tesco's, Coleman's, United Biscuits, Heinz, Vandenbergs and Jurgens, as well as J. Walter Thompson, the advertising people, and BioQuest, a firm engaged in protein feed technology. There are 7 academic, medical and local authority members and just 1 consumer representative. Consumers say 7 from industry to 1 of them proves that producers are too powerful. Is it reasonable to expect one ministry both to look after the interests of the consumer and food safety and to look after farmers and the food production industry?
Absolutely. I think it would be a tragedy if we went away from that, because if you don't have production and consumption linked under the same sponsoring ministry, you're going to duplicate the bureaucracy, you're going to have different power pressures, and no one is going to be in a position to make sure that what the consumer wants is cost-effective and practical and can be produced efficiently and safely.
The critics say that the relationship between food industry interests and the Ministry of Agriculture is simply too close for our own comfort. They say that responsibility for food safety should be taken away from the Ministry of Agriculture down there and either given to a new ministry altogether or taken right up to the other end of Whitehall and given to the Department of Health.
The Ministry of Agriculture is a very powerful body with a very powerful farmers' lobby. And inevitably somebody working within it would look at the production side of food rather than always looking at the infection health side. The health priority is quite different. They've got to see that the margins of safety are not cut. And I think that it's unacceptable. It's quite unacceptable to me that the main responsibility should be with the Ministry of Agriculture. This is a health hazard, a health matter, and it should be with the Health Department.
The assumption there is that we don't take food safety seriously, and obviously that simply cannot be right. It is in the industry's own interests, after all, to ensure that its food is of the highest safety and quality that can be achieved, because no industry depends more for its particular products on repeat sales. and if there are any concerns, then naturally sales are affected. But from our point of view, clearly, with our responsibilities for ensuring that we have the highest standards, it does actually make sense that an industry which understands the food industry and the agriculture industry, an industry that deals with animal health, a sort of group of scientists that deal with animal health all the time, it does make sense that they should be, have the responsibility for that process.
Now the ministry is being criticised for cutting back the funds the scientists get for their research. At Pirbright, this lab's been merged, and other labs are closing down. The researchers who created the new farming are being told to be more businesslike. This lab's the only place in the world which can handle all types of foot and mouth disease. Scientists work here on the worst diseases which can affect animal health. At the core of the lab is a biological high security zone. You have to strip and change to enter. The barriers are designed not to stop us getting in, but to stop the diseases studied beyond those limits ever getting out. In the last 4 years, the number of permanent staff at Pirbright has been cut by nearly a half. Last month, the former director, Brian Mahy, packed his books and left.
Right, which books next, sir? Okay, take the green ones next, but leave the blue ones. Let's stay behind.
Dr. Mahy arrived in 1984 and almost immediately learned that this independent institute was to be amalgamated with several others to save cash. He's left for the USA to run the viral disease division of the US Federal Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, where there are no cuts. Pirbright costs about £3.5 million a year to run.
Ultimately, it makes the country much less flexible in dealing with outbreaks of new diseases, sudden plagues which occur throughout the world, and we have dramatic examples of this at the present time. With things like bovine spongiform encephalopathy in cattle, which is a new disease which has appeared. As a result of the cuts over the last 5 years, the opportunities to deal with these things have been considerably diminished. And I think the government is taking a chance.
The cuts affect research on animal disease and work on food and farming systems, where it most obviously could affect us. These scientists, cold-bloodedly sampling roast beef to provide food for a computer model, are at the Bristol Meat Lab of the Institute for Food Research. Its cash now to be cut by a quarter. And they study here what may go wrong in the food chain next. There are unconfirmed reports that this particular lab may have to close completely.
Significant cuts are forecast for the coming years, which will force me to restructure the Institute, and I'll have to be more selective in terms of the types of work that we're doing, and of course the funding level dictates the speed at which we can work.
If your funds are cut back, are the chances of problems with the things that I eat, the chances of you spotting them, reduced?
They must be reduced, inevitably. I will have less capacity to range over the full food spectrum and food issues simply because I will have fewer resources.
One prominent victim of the cuts was this research at Bristol into salmonella, to try and find a way of preventing chickens carrying it in their gut. The project started long before salmonella became the problem that it's recognised to be today. The team's work will cease next month. The basic science has been done. Industry won't pay. The public funding's going to stop.
At the laboratory scale, it was 100% successful with chicks. And taking it out into industry with breeder birds, we have in fact tested it on 250,000 birds over the last 18 months. And it's not 100% successful, but extremely successful. 20 out of the 22 flocks were completely cleared of salmonella.
You're aware that cuts over the last decade have been enormous. In my own institute, there's been about a 50% cut in the last 10 years, and over a 30% cut in the last 5 years. What it means is our fundamental science base is being eroded, and eroded very quickly, which makes it more difficult for us to respond to the changing situation.
Does that matter to me, the consumer, the person who eats the food at the end?
Well, it must do, because animal disease is related to matters of what we might regard as public good in terms of welfare. But more important than that, they are related to food quality.
Scientists say the cuts are going to make our lives more dangerous. The government's case is that the food industry should pay for its own research and take jobs on at a commercial stage. One lab's been privatised completely. Through its Agricultural and Food Research Council, the AFRC, the government is now applying what it calls the near-market principle.
The danger is that commercial companies will not put large money into fundamental work because they see no direct benefit from doing so.
And does that hurt the consumer? Does that stop the consumer getting benefits the consumer otherwise would and should get?
Inevitably it will. I go back to the salmonella story. If we're unable to respond at all to the enteritidis problem, the consumer is in danger of having higher levels of salmonella in their eggs. We not only have to respond to the salmonella problem, we have to respond quickly. And it's the quick response that's being compromised by research cuts.
Do you think the cuts that the Ministry of Agriculture has made in research spending endanger consumer safety?
No, not at all. Let me be quite clear about that. We are not, the talk of near-market research funding, and what we're talking about is getting industry to fund some of the research that currently the taxpayer is funding. That does not affect any of the research that has to do with food safety or public good. Indeed, we have been increasing our expenditure on food safety and all the public aspects. What we are doing on research and development is asking the agricultural industry and the food industry, like any other industry, to take on the funding of what we describe as near-market research, which is the research close to commercial exploitation.
How does the near-market principle that you've just described cover the situation, apply to the situation at Bristol, where research on salmonella stopped just before it could become successful?
No, the question in Bristol was a somewhat different one. The AFRC came to the conclusion that the basic research had been completed and that what was now required is commercial exploitation of the product. Now, commercial exploitation depends on whether people believe that there will be a market for the particular product which they can use. And currently there are discussions going on with one or two companies about that particular piece of research and whether there should be commercial exploitation of it. But let me be equally clear that the funds that were being used for the research element of that particular project will now be switched to other priorities where it makes sense for government funding to take place on food safety R&D.
But industry hasn't picked up the tab, and so the net effect of the decision of your policy has been that salmonella research at Bristol has stopped.
No.
That project has stopped.
That particular project is coming to the end of that aspect of its life. But there are many types of different R&D which are undertaken and which in the end are not commercially exploited because there isn't a market for them. It is a question for industry itself to address in that particular area.
There's a fundamental and radical alternative to high-tech farming, and it's growing. Tony and Pat Archer have gone organic, and so's Prince Charles.
I loathe lifting leeks. Horrid, green, gungy, muddy things. I hate lifting anything at the moment. I think I've got Bert Fry back.
Still, that's one thing about going organic, even more than with ordinary vegetables.
Are you waffling about?
Well, the worse the weather, the better the prices.
I wonder if Prince Charles knows that. Bet he doesn't.
Thought it was very nice of him to send that message to our do at Cirencester.
Tony, have you just come to affirm your loyalty to the heir apparent, or was there something?
No, there are...
The organic farmers held their annual conference at the Royal Agricultural College at Cirencester last month. For years, the organic minority have preached against the brave new world of farming. They forswear the use of chemicals and artificial additives, farm non-intensively, and believe that what they grow is naturally safer to consume as a result. This year, the organic farmers hit the big time. Not just the Archers joining them for dinner, but sensationally, Prince Charles, the farmer prince, sent them an opening address. The letter was on the Duchy of Cornwall's notepaper. There's no doubt that a growing anxiety has developed amongst all sections of the community at the consequences of modern intensive farming methods, wrote the prince. The excessive use of chemicals and unnatural substances are unacceptable. I wish you all well with your deliberations, he concluded, and they thought they'd made it.
What he's done is he's drawn attention to the problems that are being faced by modern agriculture and the possible solution, not just in terms of a growth area in the food market, but the possible solution that organic farming could offer to some of the environmental problems that British agriculture has run into. What's more, he's given it the kind of credibility that it needs to be considered by politicians as a major policy option solution, a strategic solution, rather than just a diversification option, which I think is where MAF are seeing it at the moment.
What did you think of Prince Charles and his opening address to the Organic Farmers' Conference at Cirencester?
As far as organic farming is concerned, fine. I'm all for organic farming. I've got a soft spot for it because as a student I thought I was going to make my living out of organic farming.
When did you find that you couldn't?
When I started farming. I'm very happy that Prince Charles should convert his farm and exhort other people to convert theirs to supply that market. Where I parted company with him is that he suggested that he called it intensive, I call it modern farming techniques, were unsustainable, probably unsustainable, in ecological, environmental and health grounds. I see no evidence of that at all, and I don't think that he should have made such an assertion.
The Royal and Organic Tendency at Cirencester held a show of their own work, an alternative harvest supper. Their food's more difficult to keep fresh because it's preservative-free, but it's getting more popular and being sold under a slogan that sounds reassuring. Food you can trust. Implication, you can't trust the rest. There was more proof of their growing recognition. Their next guest was the fruit and veg supremo of the biggest supermarket chain of all, Sainsbury's. He was down to earth.
And it sometimes amuses me when, standing in a branch, a customer comes back with an organically grown lettuce with aphids in it and says, he's got aphids in it, and there are 2 or 3 aphids in it, correct. And I am almost tempted to say, but I daren't, but madam, the aphids are alive.
They took his point. The love of the pure and simple life is expensive. Sainsbury's stock organic, just a little. A dozen items at Camden in North London out of 300 fruit and vegetable lines in all. But at a price. Organic tomatoes, £1.59. Non-organic tomatoes, 68p a pound. And everything organic was at a premium.
Varieties, really good dense heads. It used to be quite loose at this time of year. Sprouts?
Mr. Love and his local manager haven't put organic produce on the shelves out of deep conviction or because they disapprove of modern farming with chemicals. They don't.
Cabbage. We take cognizance of the fact that the organic farmers have a very strong support among people who have this health image, and therefore, right, if they feel that they get the comfort from buying organically grown produce, good. That is their view. And we won't dispute it.
Do you think the time will come when Sainsbury's stock just this and not the other?
Not in my time, because really, how could we fill these shelves with organically grown produce?
Supermarkets know their customers' demands won't be satisfied by organic food alone. But they sense that shoppers want convenience and less chemicals as well. Supermarket factory buying power has exerted a huge sway on farming systems. That pressure's helped to make farming the way it is. But they also intervene directly, telling farmers how to farm. That means if consumers want to change the world of farming, supermarkets, laser reading our choices at the checkout, will respond. And there's evidence that they are now telling farmers on our behalf to adjust the way they farm.
Yeah, there's mildew in there, all right.
David Barker and his brother have a mixed farm of 1,200 acres in Suffolk.
I think that we won't need to spray this. I don't want to spray the blooming stuff. That's too expensive.
He wouldn't want to go organic, but he does deliberately choose chemicals to spray upon his land that cost more, but only kill the pests he really wants to. Then he has 1,000 pigs. And here the next decisions that affect them will only be taken when the supermarket, Marks and Spencer, gives the nod. His pigs are supermarket driven. That goes for how he keeps them and what sort of pigs he keeps.
These little piggies won't be going off to market. They're off to the bacon factory, every one of them. They're all spoken for. What you're looking at here is supermarket bacon, except it hasn't got the shiny wrapping on yet. And it was the supermarket that chose the male strain of pig and the female strain that they thought, that they judge, would produce the best little bacon makers.
4 or 5 years ago, we had the choice of changing slightly our production system to fulfill the demands of a large supermarket chain. And we felt it was right to do that because that's where the future lays, and therefore we have locked our pig unit, if you like, into a system whereby the product we know is going to go through to the housewife, through our local bacon factory, to a large supermarket chain. But I think at the end of the day, it's actually been a good thing for us, and hopefully it's a good thing for the consumer and the supermarkets.
Marks and Spencer say they're now involved in trials of pig farming systems with less intensive methods. As they say, animals bred for human consumption should be well treated. Farmer Barker introduced deep straw for his pigs because the supermarket people asked him to. Soon he expects to put the supermarket's next plans into practice.
I think actually it's something not just that they want us to do, I think it's something actually from a pig point of view I want to do myself.
There are other farms where farmers, sensing that consumer tastes are shifting, are taking similar decisions on their own. The principle's the same, following consumer power, giving us a different, greener future, not quite the Prince Charles counter-revolution, but not quite the world we've got.
In your bones, would you like to change the way you farm?
Yes, but I think we have to be very careful in this sort of conversation that we're not talking about going from one extreme to the other. We're carrying out this discussion in the luxury of having plenty of food. I think there's a middle course, but of course the middle course is never the popular one. It's never the one that gets publicised. It's either all organic or it's all chemical. But I think if you go all organic, there will be supply problems because I don't think we will be able to guarantee a continuity of supply.
797975. How much more have you got to do, Brian?
But most high-tech farmers can't change course now. They're locked into the investment that they've made for our cheap food. Oliver Woolston has 6 full-time workers and a part-time secretary now.
Do you still have wet
In 1946, the farm had 10 times as many workers on half the acreage and nothing like the yield. He's gone industrial. He won't turn back.
I own a third of this farm and I rent 2/3 of it. The third that I own, I have to pay a mortgage on, much as people who own a house have to pay a mortgage on that. The 2/3 that I don't own, I pay rent, in this case, to a pension fund. Now, were I to go along to that pension fund and say, look, I've seen the light, I want to have a simpler, more extensive, more organic, nicer, better sort of farming, I put better in quotes. But please, pension fund, this is going to involve a substantial drop in income for me. Please lower my rent accordingly. They would not be at all amused, but more importantly, the people who depend on my rent for their pensions would be even less amused. Therefore, it simply isn't a practical, feasible possibility for me. Much as I'd like to, it just isn't on.
When the salmonella scare subsides, farming won't go back to Mother Nature. She can't grow all we're demanding. But there's a cost for intervening, a different manufactured risk.
I think when you have an intensive farming system, you're bound to get big problems when things go wrong.
So in your view, salmonella wasn't an unfortunate accident, it was a prototype.
It was an accident waiting to happen. That's what the salmonella and eggs crisis was. And what we should be saying is, why were we putting up with such a degree of contamination in the poultry flock in the first place?
Is it the case that as agriculture changes to being industrial in scale right through the food chain, that the risks become industrial as well?
Well, I think this process has been going on really over the last 40 years. And what matters is that we ensure through the regulatory processes that as techniques change, as new products come onto the market, that we're keeping abreast of those as much as we possibly can to ensure that food safety is preserved throughout. And don't forget the tremendous benefits that the consumer has had from all these processes. You would never have been able to do that without the huge investment that not only farmers, but everyone through the food chain, the big companies and so on, who are developing the new products, are putting into it.
If someone producing multi-million aircraft just happens to put one wire in the wrong place, you can kill 350 people. In exactly the same way, one has got to admit that if you are going to mass produce anything, one error at any stage in the chain, whether it's growing, processing, adding value, or at the retail or consumer end, could have very much greater effect. And of course, the further back in the chain the error occurs, the greater the number of people. If it's pilot error, it's only people on that plane, but if it is a basic design fault, it may affect 7 or 8 planes.
The salmonella outbreak doesn't prove all modern food is dangerous, yet neither was it just a freak. Overall, our food may be safer, but in mass production systems, large-scale accidents will happen. That's the price we pay for cheap food, factory fresh.
Next week, an exclusive report from Iran as David Lomax travels from Tehran to the devastated war zone where an uneasy ceasefire still holds. Inside the Ayatollah's Iran in Panorama at 9:30 next week. Newsnight over on BBC Two in 20 minutes looks to the future for Afghanistan without